board part. There we go. So, welcome everybody. This is Gloria with Crafted Minds. If you don't already know who I am, um, and we've got more people joining as we talk here, and hopefully you've got a nice pint of something. Um, since we've got Michael Meade of Sullivan's, well, introduce in a second, I had to get some Sullivan's. This is called the Maltings Irish Ale. It's a really nice red ale. I'm going to have him talk about that in a few and where you can get it, definitely. Um, so I'm enjoying my Wednesday night. So if you have a beer, I say cheers. Let's start the happy hour, shall we? It's
Awesome.
been a long day. Let's put it that way.
Very good.
All right, so we've got Michael Meade, and he is the CEO for Sullivan's Brewing Company out of Kilkenny, Ireland. And I should fully disclose that I used to work for Sullivan's Brewing Company about a year, more than a year ago before COVID. And I had the pleasure of meeting and knowing Michael and the rest of the Sullivan's crew, and I was fortunate enough to go to Ireland as well. So that was a really special trip, and I really got to see a little bit of the Irish countryside. I want to go back. So Michael, this is a really casual thing. I'm not like, I don't have like all these set of questions already written down or anything like that. It's a happy hour.
Yeah.
So maybe you could just kind of share with us a little bit for people who don't know about Sullivan's Brewing Company. I don't know where you went. Oh, there you are. Like, the beginnings, where it's from, where can we get it? And then we can start talking about the specific beers of Ireland after that. But if you could just talk to us about Sullivan's, that'd be great.
No, that's a nice opportunity for me to have a podium to blab about ourselves. So I appreciate this a lot.
Of
And
course.
we enjoyed having Gloria on the team. And Gloria has in case it's not obvious to all of you, a really different and unusual background, but some as a teacher, which I guess you're already feeling because you've taken some courses, and then also just huge interest in beer. And now here we go again with a new venture for her. So it's pretty cool. We had Gloria on our podcast a while back. I hope she let you know about that and that you heard her.
I did.
That was one of the very good ones for the year. So before I start and do what you asked me to do, can I
Sure.
just ask, I don't know if you want to answer for everybody, Gloria, or anybody can kind of pipe in. I have a feel for Crafted Minds and the mission there. But are you guys like newbies to wanting to care about beer? What did you just got out of bed one day and say, I want to learn more about beer from Gloria? Did you drink too much at age 14 and it stuck with you and you want to keep doing it? Or what's the background on kind of your interest in beer? And then I can kind of, after telling the Sullivan's background, maybe angle towards some of those things,
Sure. Well, we've got two of my students here. We've got some people. Tom, welcome. I don't know you yet, but yeah, whoever wants to just chime in and talk about your beer experience, or why you're here, why you took the class, or how you know me. Don't
Start.
There you go.
All right.
I'm Dante. Gloria and I actually know each other for 31 years because we went to college together. I am still a beer newbie, but I did take the basic course.
Yep.
Learned a lot, so I'm going to take the advanced course too.
Good.
I want to learn even more. And then when Gloria comes, she takes me to breweries and we practice the skills.
Yep.
So I'm still, working on that aspect of it.
Okay.
And Dante is located in New York City. So because of the proximity of upstate to New York, I try to visit. And like he said, when I go visit New York, like we've been to Brooklyn, did some of the breweries there. We've been to, there's a new place in Soho called the Torch and Crown, I believe it is.
Yep.
So whenever I'm there, I always try to enlighten Dante to the beer world, and then I suggested that he take the course, and yeah, he's been doing great, and he's going to take the next level.
Okay, great. So it's basically everybody's just signing up, just general interest in beer. And, I guess the way we would sign up for a wine course and try to get ourselves rounded out. Okay, that's helpful. Well, should I answer? Does anybody else want to weigh in? And then
Tina or Martin or Tom?
all good.
I'm just a big fan of Sullivan's. I like the beer, and I try to buy as much of it as possible.
I hear you. Anybody else? All right.
I can speak. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm Adina. I'm from Philadelphia. I just relocated to Delaware. I started kind of like my craft beer journey, I would say, a little over 10 years ago. But I mean, I love the flavor profiles. I have a blog on Instagram called Black Girl on Tap. And it's really just exploring the beers that I drink, but then also trying to bring it to my community, because growing up in the inner city, our stop and go stores just had kind of like mass produced beer and malt liquor and things like that. So it wasn't anything that my community necessarily was exposed to. And so I am trying my best to just make it more present so that people can understand like the depth and the beauty of craft beer. And, I'm trying to do some events as far as planning for pairings. I did a food and beer pairing in the past and a dessert and beer pairing in the past. So it'll be great to learn some more about the Irish beers, because I can figure out how to do an event with that. So I'm excited to hear and listen.
Okay, that's nice of you. Don't let me finish without really addressing some of your points there, in case we get distracted, because I got a lot to say about everything you just said there. It's interesting to me, ranging from the inner city problem on getting beer to folks, and then food pairings, which I've studied a fair amount. So don't let me stray too far. Let me come back to all that.
Okay.
That's good stuff and interesting to me. Look, I don't want this to, I know we want to focus on Ireland in general. Probably we can talk a little bit about what we see in Irish pubs when I'm there, and some of which will surprise you and some of which won't. I want to make sure we talk about that. And so I don't want this to be an advertisement for Sullivan's. I don't think that's the purpose of this at all. But here we are, and I want to tell you about the company just briefly in the background, so you have a vibe on us, because it's a really authentic story. It's a very real story. And as we've begun to sell beer in America, I feel like if we meet the general manager, quote, beer buyer, whether it's a store or a bar, and they're willing to listen to the conversation, 90% of them will give us a shot. It's like our batting ratio is ridiculous. And because the story is so unique. And so I'll just briefly kind of touch on that. What I can do, just because, my God, we spend our whole lives on Zoom, don't we? If you want, Gloria, you could enable me to be able to share my screen, and I could show a couple of things.
Okay, let's see.
Forget where you do that.
Multiple participants can share simultaneously. Is that a good one? Can you share?
Yeah, but you can just do it one at a time in case everybody wants to have a battle here and like show stuff,
Oh, okay. Let me know if you can share.
I will try right now. Yeah. So,
Okay.
Can you guys see anything yet? Now you can. Okay.
There we go. Yep.
Okay. So, I will happily say that my favorite part of our various logos is what you see in that circle, which is a key to the city of Kilkenny, and it's a stalk of barley, because we source our barley in Kilkenny, Ireland. It's like an hour and 10 minutes southwest of Dublin. I mean, I make fun of it with my colleagues in Ireland as the Las Vegas of Ireland. And the reason I say that has nothing to do with Las Vegas, because I'm not a Las Vegas guy, but because it's so close, and it's a completely walkable city of about 23,000 people. But my God, I don't think you could walk more than 1.5 miles in any direction and leave the city center. Just loads of people come in every weekend from Dublin to escape for their weekend of fun, whatever, stag parties, bachelor parties, whatever you want to call them over there. I think they're called hen parties for women, So it's a very vibrant place. the other thing about Kilkenny that I love is most Americans know Killarney because it's the city, kind of like it's the gateway city to the Ring of Kerry, which if you get to Ireland, you can't go to Ireland and not explore the Ring of Kerry. But I also feel like it's too touristic, whereas there's a heart and soul to Kilkenny. So it's my favorite, and it is a medieval city. So really, you'd have to look for it nowadays with what has been built and so forth. But it is an old walled city, and even where our tap room is, we have to be sensitive on expanding and things based on archaeological findings, potential archaeological findings, and so forth, including just walls that are ancient and things. I think, just to be frank about Irish beer, I'm not saying everybody notices this, but most people will remember that Guinness is from 1759 because it's, in their branding and so forth. And what most people don't realize is that a company that was bought by Guinness, Smithwick's, started actually quite a bit earlier in 1710. And I'm here to tell you that we're the oldest commercial brewery in Ireland. We were founded in 1702, which is a cool badge of honor. And that begins the story that resonates with restaurant and bar owners and store owners and stuff. So we, although it was the oldest commercial brewery, there are reasons why we're on a specific mission that we're on. And can you still see that? I hope so. But I'll just give you a little bit of a timeline. One of the monikers we use is brewing is in our blood. And the reason for that is it really, the most important part of the things you're seeing there is the horse as it applies to why brewing is in our blood. But I'll just start at the beginning. So again, 1702 Sullivan starts, 1710 Smithwick starts, both in the same small town that is now 23,000 people. So God knows what it was in the early 1700s, right? And there was a proud 800-year brewing tradition. Monks, the more and more you study beer with Gloria or elsewhere, you'll kind of learn about 3 points about water, right? You'll learn about the Czech Republic as being famous for soft water with low minerals. You'll learn about Burton-on-Trent, the home of Bass. And you'll learn about sulfate as being very important to their water, their natural water for brewing processes. And then you'll learn about Ireland and its limestone-rich water, which is certainly true of Dublin and Kilkenny. And so it was no secret that monks began to brew there 800 years ago. And then along came these two families in the early 1700s. Both families, for lack of a better way to describe it, they were fierce competitors, they were fierce allies. People began to marry others in the other family. One's the mayor, the other's the mayor. All these things are interesting. But the one thing I'll tell you, if you go to Kilkenny and you go to the Smithwick experience, which is a bit of a mini museum, you do quite learn about how the Sullivan's family and the Smithwick's family, the 1840s were the years of the Irish famine, the Great Irish Famine, when how could an island that's surrounded by a sea full of fish have 1 million people die of starvation? It's an ugly conversation and a lot of angles to that. And both families, besides employing basically everybody in the town of Kilkenny, open their brewery doors. And if you're learning about the brewing process from Gloria, there's a stage at which you sort of have this porridge-based thing called wort, W-O-R-T. And, obviously it's nutrient rich and so forth. And so the both breweries effectively open their doors as soup kitchens. And so are very, very respected families, both families. So that's useful to know in our background and something for us to be proud of. Now, we can go through some other examples in sort of a real live world, a present world example. But one thing that happens in the beer industry is companies acquire other companies to bury their competitors, literally to stifle them away, you know what I mean? To take them out of the category. And so when we see this horse visual, which leads to brewing is in our blood, what happened is the leader of the Sullivan's family in 1918, by the way, if you go to a smaller Irish village anywhere in Ireland, it will have 10 pubs, it'll have one Chinese restaurant, it'll have what they call a chipper, which is where you get fish and chips, late night when you've had too many beers. And it will have 2 bookies because Irish people cannot bet enough on anything. All right. And so lo and behold, in France, the family leader of the Sullivan's clan bet the entire business on a horse race and lost. And so in some of our branding, we actually bust out the horse, and it plays well not too far from Syracuse and Saratoga. And it's a fun one, although it's a serious one, because what then happened is the Smithwick's family acquired all the assets, brand assets and trademarks of their competitor Sullivan's, and did what I alluded to. They buried the brand in the early 1920s. So although we started in 1702, we were dormant for 100 years, basically. A little less than that, and that's what we'll get into. The reason why we say brewing is in our blood, because when we say we're bringing brewing back to Kilkenny as our core mission, the way this happened is that in 1965, Smithwick's sold themselves to Guinness. So this is a bit of Irish beer history to pull it all together. In 1998, Diageo, which is an English company, acquired Guinness, and therefore Smithwick's embedded in there. But in that deal, the Sullivan's trademarks didn't transfer over. And then interestingly enough, in about 2012, Diageo made the decision to no longer brew Smithwick's in Kilkenny, which became like a bit of a personal affront to the community. Again, you know, huge employer of townspeople for 300 years. Kilkenny City is part of the county of Kilkenny. So when you talk about counties in Ireland, so that stuck in the craw of a lot of people. You know, now you have an 800-year brewing tradition, and nothing's going to be brewed in Kilkenny. So it became like the cause to figure out how to do this again and bring it back to Kilkenny. And lo and behold, an angle to doing that was to relaunch Sullivan's, the oldest brewery in Ireland. And actually, Tom is involved in this heavily. That's what we did. And when we say brewing is in our blood, it was the Smithwick's family. Think about it. They had sold their name in 1965. They weren't a brewing family anymore. It was long gone, right? But the patriarch of the family is still around. Wanted to relaunch. You know, felt like brewing had to happen in Kilkenny. By the way, Smithwick's was now and is now being brewed at St. James's Gate in Dublin, where they brew Guinness. And so we got together in 2014, talked about it, figured it out, whatever. And we relaunched in Ireland in May of 2016, and brought the beer to America beginning in January of 17. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and that was our first market. So we did that. So that's what we mean when we say brewing is in our blood. This is about the Smithwick's family in that respect, although they're proud to attack their own name and outsell Smithwick's. So any questions on any of that? That's just the backdrop on us. Want to give you that feel. Anything there that you'd want to ask about? Okay. Let me just ask if it's helpful. When you begin to study beer, and you've done that, you know, well, before I go there, let me maybe give you a vibe on what it's like in an Irish pub. Have a number of you been to Ireland or not been to Ireland? Or okay, I see one saying no.
I just found out I'm Irish, though.
All right.
Oh, and I did too.
From Dublin.
Oh.
Yeah, I did an ancestry.com, and I'm 3% Irish.
That's all you need. You know what I mean?
All you need.
Yeah. Well, you know, post-COVID, when it's over, you know, like, I think the weather's generally pretty rough in Ireland, you know, so maybe in a late February on a President's Weekend, go to Ireland when tickets are a third of the cost, you know, and go over there, because quite frankly, you spend a lot of time inside unless you're a golfer. And when I say inside, I mean pubs, right? You know, the stereotype is real, besides the fact that it's the greenest country you could ever visit. Literally, the stereotype of the Irish pub is, like, I'd say a fabric of society, is a really real thing. And, you know, many of the pubs, and you sometimes see it kind of trying to be replicated in the US, but, you know, they're heavily partitioned, so you can have little chat rooms with your friends and things like that oftentimes. And as you know, oftentimes live music and so forth. But just to talk about the beer business for a second, for an American who strolls into an Irish pub, I've been going to Ireland very often since 2006, and especially very often including during COVID, because of what I'm doing for a living here. But one of the things that shook me a little bit when I first walked in is Guinness will be in every pub you could imagine. But then you begin to see how the business side of things play out. And what you see is two things that you're beginning to see in America over the last, say, 5-7 years. The presence of cider on tap lines is prevalent. And now even in America, right, we have craft breweries making craft ciders for sure. But we didn't probably 7 years ago, if I had to guess. And unfortunately in Ireland, it's not a crafty game there, it's big cider. What's rough about Ireland is that it's dominated by big beer. And so the craft movement is there. It's just, it's very difficult for them to play in the, what we call on-premise, meaning the in bar, in restaurant, in hotel game. So your first observation is I see a lot of cider alongside Guinness, but I think the next thing you always see, there's two things. There's something you always see and there's something you never see, which might be shocking to you guys as Americans, but you always see a lager as the next thing in line. And so in my mind, I don't think of any pub as a Guinness pub, even though you can certainly think of that. And as a matter of fact, there's a certain type of Guinness sign that hangs off of a building. It's a very, very old looking jug, almost like a short mug of Guinness that identifies them as like Guinness's top selling bars, basically. And they're the most historical pubs generally in Ireland. But the next thing you really see is, for me, what defines the bar is what lager they have on tap. It's really goofy. I mean, first of all, unfortunately, one of them is Budweiser. But I usually see that duke out happening between Heineken, Carlsberg, and Budweiser. I might be forgetting one, but that seems to be how I think about a pub or a restaurant when you go in. It's like, who's owning these taps? The thing that I wanted to mention that you'll never see in Ireland, I mean, I would say 99.9% assuredly never see, is Harp. You know, Diageo also owns Harp. Now, it's virtually unavailable in Ireland. It's so it's like an export thing. You'll see it, and you know this from stores where you live. Like, it gets built up ahead of St. Patrick's Day. That's where you'll find Harp, but you probably won't even find it on most Irish bars in America. Although you certainly find it on some, and they believe that they're pouring this thing that's happening in Ireland all the time. It's not. A fun story about Harp is that, based on, I think almost like the Tylenol scare in the 80s. I mean, based on like rumor about their recipe, they actually completely changed it in the 1990s because there were negative rumors flying around about what's in it. And so they have a new crafted recipe. They crafted a new recipe at that time. And so that's a fun little trivia thing there. But you don't see Harp in Ireland. You just really won't see it, which might be surprising to you. There's another aspect, not in Ireland itself, but I want to bring it up. Because it's true of Northern Ireland, where we sell some beer, because Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and in the UK, therefore Scotland and England itself, there's this phenomenon called Tide pubs, TIED pubs, and what it really means is what's on offer inside the pub is dictated by the owner in an agreement that can involve the real estate deal, you know, the rental deal, the whole thing. And so publicans in those respects can be obliged, literally obligated to have to pour certain beers and so forth. And the reason I bring that up is to talk about Ireland in a negative sense. I'll say one thing as a positive. Nowhere will you find better beer, cleaner lines, a commitment to glassware by brand, and presentation of beer, in my opinion, finer than in Ireland. It's an art form, you know. So that's to be noted. But there's a dirty side of the business, and it's just allowed to be dirty. It doesn't mean anybody's playing dirty. But the truth of the matter is, when you hear the word pay to play, that's illegal in the United States with state liquor authorities and stuff. So I can't walk into a pubs in New York City and say, here's 10 free kegs. I want all 3 of my ales on draft here. I can't do that. Whereas Heineken can walk into a bar in Ireland and say, would like to do a deal. Here's 120 grand. and here's what's going to happen for the next 2 years. I want that tap out. I want that one can stay. I'm going to bring in all the other beers in my portfolio and play this a little dirty, so that makes it tough even for us in Ireland. But imagine if you're just really a craft brewer in Ireland, which has a lot of legs. They have a very, very difficult time getting into the bars that, any of us would tour through or find in a village and so forth. So that's a bummer. So just want to let you know. I see Dante's asking here about, well, Sullivan's is in New York City and I can help you find it. So thanks for asking. I'm sitting in New York City right now too. Yeah. So that's sort of the.
Well, Gloria would know. I thought it wasn't here. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, I can tell you a touch about that. Yeah. Our path in the United States, so we have this new thing going for us. So guess what happened so far this year, which helps us, except for it's COVID, right? Murphy's is no longer, if you've ever seen Murphy's Stout, Murphy's is no longer being sold in the United States. And so when I talk about what works or doesn't work for big beer when they buy a competitor, or whether they suppress it or ditch it or whatever they're going to do, Heineken owns Murphy's Irish Stout. And Murphy's was sort of the pride of County Cork. That's where it originated in the west of Ireland and was brewed. And lo and behold, guess what? I have a stout, Sullivan's Black Marble Stout. So that's a market opportunity for us, but it's still not great to see beers buried, That's going on out there. You may have heard of course you've heard about Killian's Irish Red. That's owned by Coors. And do you know that they normally only brew that beer for the build up to St. Patrick's Day? So they sell a ton of it in America and they sell it for roughly, 4 months of the year. And it's kind of interesting, but Killian's, so it's sort of like a fake Irish beer, right? And they're not making it available this season, we've been told. So the weird things going out, and you could probably say in both those cases, COVID had a heavy hand in that and affecting them. So that's sort of like what I see in Ireland and what I feel, but there's no doubt that pubs are the fabric of society. And if it's not known to you guys, like they're severely locked down still and will be until like the Canada effect. And its earliest thought on being open is May. So imagine taking these, I've always noticed when you sit in an Irish pub, what's really cool, because people can be there at 18 and they're drinking, you see high school boyfriend, girlfriends, and then you see like 90-year-old husband and wives all in the same pub having a nice time. And I think that's pretty unique, and everybody's just there to talk and see people and stuff like that. So that's fun. Any questions so far, or am I rambling? Because I have a couple other things I can touch on before I get to where the beer is and stuff. But anything else you're wondering about kind of Irish beers?
So Lauren, you have your hand up. I see a little hand there. Is that?
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to comment on something you said earlier. How technically the big guys aren't allowed to come in and offer 10 cases to buy a line, but it's still happening to us left and right. I mean, I'm here in Orlando, Florida, and I know of certain accounts around Disney and such that pretty much tell me that they have a deal with the distributor. Yeah. So it's really upsetting. So yeah, just so you're not alone in that. Even though they have to be more shady about it over here, but.
Well, if you Googled Tide pubs, TIED pubs, read about the pros and cons. I believe there's even some bills in the parliament on the topic, like my problem with big beer doing that in Ireland is that there is a vibrant craft brewing community in Ireland, and they have no shot. Now, we do decently well in Ireland, but we've got people and we're gunning, and relationship selling and so forth, but it doesn't mean it's easy. And a lot of it speaks to the fact that our master brewer used to be the master brewer of Guinness and the master brewer of Smithwick's. So we've got a liquid that really stands up that, sells. When we're in, we sell a lot of beer. So we've got that going for us. But of course, all these things, like you just alluded to in Orlando, or what's true of the business in Ireland and the UK, that stifles ingenuity, right? like what if you yourself started brewing beer and like you made a great sour, just became
Yeah.
your expertise. If you got pinched out, like that's not good for business. And we all know that. It's more intuitive for us to know that in America. And that's why it's illegal in America. I recognize it can happen. But it happens in maybe, well, hopefully not in bad ways. It can happen in good, productive ways, too. Meaning like, hey, if you buy 10, you get this, like that kind of thing,
Right.
And in high volume areas, which I imagine there's plenty of them in Orlando, like it can all sort of take care of itself for everybody.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
like there's some really nice beers in Ireland that have no chance of getting tap lines, and that's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all a game.
Yeah. Yeah. I could share something here, and I'm going to use my, I've never tried to share a photo, so let me see if that works.
Let me know if you need me to do something.
No, it probably means I have to get not dumb here. One of the things, if how we have stereotypes about European beers as Americans, one of the things that's interesting is that when you go to England, would you ever realize that all the beers, not all, but 90% of the beers are super low ABV beers? I found that to be shocking as a younger person on sort of exploring beer. But if you take a look at this, as you begin to study beer more and more, I don't know if that's big enough. If it's not, tell me. You become acquainted with the idea that a lot of the curriculum will spawn from the Brewers Association or the BJCP, which is the Beer Judge Certification Program. And America's done something really cool, which is to try to put definition around beer. It's so funny because to me, like, I'm really interested in this, and apparently you guys are too, because you wanted to study it. But like, I remember I moved to California and I said to all my buddies, I'm like, I am not going to Napa or Sonoma ever, and I stuck to that for 6 months because I was like, I just don't want to become like some loser. I just want to I want to order a wine and decide if I like it or if I don't. And by the way, there's still no definition around wine like the BJCP and the Brewers Association has done in America. And by the way, in Canada, by extension, and even down into Mexico. But what people would be surprised at is that Smithwick's, the most famous red ale really in the world, or most widely distributed, is only 3.8% alcohol. So a big thing in Ireland, and our beers are reflective of this as well, because we brew our beers in Ireland, is this concept of, you have to think about the word if you haven't thought about it already, but the concept of sessionability. What is a session, right? I always like to say it's where, a 5'1" person doesn't get blown out of their chair if they have 4 beers. That's my, little, because I'm a bit of a wise guy. Like, that's sort of how I think about that, right? But think about it. Guess what's going on in Ireland? Pubs tend to close at 11:30, and it is a session from whenever they get there until whenever they have to leave. And it's social, and you don't want to get blown out of your chair if you have a, tolerance issue. People crush pints in Ireland, and therefore the alcohol is low. So, I don't know, Gloria, if your group has begun to touch on these topics, but whether, like, for instance, I've been to beer festivals like you all have and whatever. I've also been to beer symposiums. These frameworks on color, perceived bitterness, and ABV content allow global brewers, frankly, to say, I'm going to make an Irish red ale. So like Great Lakes Brewing will make Conway's Irish ale. And they're effectively trying to meet these styles. SRM for color is standard reference measure. So that we can begin to say, we understand when we're looking at a glass, like what's happening, which we really can't do in wine. It looks purple, right? Obviously you can see deeper ruby or lighter looking wines or whatever. But I just wanted to throw this up here as the framework that a traditional Irish red ale is supposed to be very low ABV. And incidentally, I chose the ABVs for our beers in America myself personally. And the best bars, in my opinion, that you walk into in America are bars that could be chalk, that could be digital, but I love to see all of this. I love to see the SRM, so I understand the color of the beer I might order because I don't know. I like to see where it's from. The most important thing for me is IBUs, because I'm not an IPA person. So I know when you're heading for 40 or higher, you're heading into really, really hoppy land, which for me isn't a good place. It might be for the next person, So that one guides me a lot. And then again, just for what's my program this evening, this afternoon, tonight, I want to know the ABV, so I figure out how I'm going to, kind of saddle up to the bar or not, So I wanted to share that with you, that's how we can think about Irish Red. And ours is at the top of the band at 5% because I felt that America has moved to a point where I love to start with a Kolsch or a sour and get down into the 3.5 to 4.5 zip code as my first beer, because I just like the refreshing aspect of that. But that doesn't mean everybody else does. I'm just describing myself. But I know on Untapped, I mean, I have a history of being, just this light angling person, because those are where I settle in. But I felt that to be credible in the craft sense in America, you have to have some meat on the bone. And so I went for 5% on the red some of you are drinking on the call. Is that helpful?
I think it's also interesting that, or maybe you can answer this question, the specifically for this Irish red ale in particular, the alcohol content is different in Ireland from what I remember, as opposed to the 5% here in the States. Is there a reason for that, or does Irish brewers do that in general, or is that just a Sullivan's thing?
Well, so this is a great point, right? Because the answer to that is true and was true, but since you've started your venture, now all our beers are the same ABV in Ireland and America.
Oh, okay. Because
what we started doing in our tap room in Kilkenny is given the 5% version and the 4% version, and everybody kept ordering the 5%. So I said, after a while, we're like, okay. And by the way, that makes it easier for us, in the brewing process and kind of keeping everything sane. So we've switched. But what I always like to tell people, and let me share the next one, we'll go to, again, the parameters of just Irish Stout, better known as Irish Dry Stout. So this is Guinness, and this is Sullivan's Black Marble Stout. And these are the parameters. But based on Ireland, how many times have you heard, oh, you got to go to Ireland because the Guinness is so much better? So this is crap. This is factually crap. As you learn more about brewing, what you learn is that brewers are chemists, and they can chemically replicate water profiles from anywhere on the planet. So that's not true. The water isn't flowing out of the Wicklow Mountains into St. James's Gate, and we all go, ooh, and then enjoy a Guinness. It's not what happens. So my opinion on why people like Guinness better in Ireland is because, you guessed it, it's way lower in alcohol, and so you can have 10 of them and you won't, you don't feel the same way, And by the way, Irish Stouts, Guinness and Sullivan's included, are, the profile from a carbohydrate point of view is a complete oxymoron. People look at Guinness and say, I don't want to have too many of them, I get full. The fact of the matter, it's one of the lightest profiled beers out there, which is perverse. So this gives you now, two things happen in a stout, right? And you'll see that we're now up to pronounced IBUs, international bitterness units. I want to understand bitterness. That's a normalizing benchmark, right? So we're heading up into IPA land when you're at 45, right? But the truth of the matter is, and this is what's fun about a stout, you're getting two things going on. You're getting roast from malt, right? And that's why the beer is very dark, by the way, is that it's highly roasted malt, barley, in other words. And so you tend to get chocolate or roast flavors and so forth. But stouts can be quite bitter. And by the way, that the elegance in brewing is how do you elegantly balance the bitterness to the maltiness. And so that's why stouts tend to have some of these very complex flavor profiles. Now you see these are typical of Ireland, but Guinness in America, I've seen it on menus as high as 5.5%. I've seen it typically at 5%, and I have seen it at 4.5%. But again, typically 4% in Ireland, which is a big difference if you're, again, sidling up to a bar and gonna plan your evening, right? Our master brewer happened to live in Africa for somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 years. I always forget the answer to this. It's somewhere between 13 and 20 years. So let's say 15. And what's cool about that is, do you remember hating Guinness when you first had it as a kid? Well, it's because the Guinness that was sold in America was non-nitro in those bottles, and it was sort of a very coffee-like version. I mean, I'm 52 years old, so it was terrible when I was young, you know. But one of the fun things about our master brewing, yeah, sorry, yeah, as a kid, one of the fun things about our master brewer, sorry, I got to just skip something here to get to the right photo, to pull that up, is that if you ever go to Ireland, you have to make sure you go to the Guinness storehouse. It's the brewery, that's St. James's Gate, and that's the brewery tour, you know, and you go up to the Infinity Bar at the end, and you have your pints of stout, and it's fun, and it's very, very well done. But they have a room there that's almost like an IMAX theater, except for it's only probably a 12-foot ceiling. It's all painted black inside. It's a big arch. And what they do is they play at very loud volume on a curved screen in that whole room all of Guinness's global commercials in different languages and stuff like that. And the thing that really stood out for me was long before I was involved with Sullivan's, I had done that tour a couple times, was the African commercials. And what I didn't know at the time, which I hope I'm gonna like wildly say something to you here, that in terms of it being an unknown, but the #1 market outside of Ireland and the United States for Guinness is Nigeria. And that's a mind blower for me. It still is every time I say it or talk about it. But the beautiful colors and music and stuff and the Guinness commercials in Africa were incredible. And so our master brewer is Ian Hamilton, and he was stationed by Guinness to brew in both Cameroon and Nigeria for the bulk of his career. And one of the stouts that you'll occasionally see on store shelves here, you can find them in Whole Foods and specialty beer stores, is Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. And it sort of falls in this layer between what I'll call the definition of stout being Irish dry stout. 2 layers above it are imperial stouts, which are high ABV, and yes, have a tie to Russia in the sense they were originally for export to there, and that's why they're called imperial. And this is in the middle, but foreign extra stout is very, very predominant in Africa, and it was also heavily exported to island nations and stuff like that. So this is just a fun anecdote, but you can't take this out of the Irish repertoire. On the other hand, we at Sullivan's are probably, I mean, almost definitely never brewing a foreign extra stout, but it's a cool beer category to talk about, and something that's been part of Ireland forever. So any questions there?
I think that's really interesting about the foreign extra stout. I've seen it like in my studies. I can't say that I've ever had a foreign extra stout. I don't know if those are available in the States or Canada.
Yeah.
Guinness has one here.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could definitely find them for sure. Yeah.
I have a question. I might have missed the first part. You said, why is it that it was being sent over? How did it get so popular in Nigeria?
Geez, I don't know the answer to that necessarily.
Okay.
You
I was
know,
just wondering if maybe it was exported for a certain reason and then it just picked up. And
well, you know, that's a global Guinness, Sullivan's, and Smithwick's were exporting internationally by the end of the late 1700s. You know, ourselves included. You know, we've got pictures of our beer in Boston Harbor in the early 1800s. You know, so
wow. Even to
yeah.
Nigeria back then?
What's that?
Even to Nigeria back then?
Not Sullivan's, but apparently Guinness. You know, You know, like there's weird stories of colonialism here that like that make this not
Right.
that hard to understand, right?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So I get it. What's really interesting is how it's become such a fabric of society in Africa, you know? Yeah, I mean, geez, you know, it makes me wonder if we should ever try to go to Africa. It's a good question.
Right. Yeah.
And we have some people that, I've met a good few people that would like to help us do that.
Oh, cool.
'Cause, you know, obviously the palate's there, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's been proven out, right?
That's very
Now,
true.
is that, do you happen to know, is it only concentrated in Nigeria and Cameroon, or is this something that's also spread out in the African continent? Just the what's the word? The affinity for having a stout.
Geez, you know, I don't know the answer to that. I know it is prevalent in South Africa, which would make sense. You know, don't forget South Africa, you know, English roots and all this junk, you know. So, you know, Guinness is gigantic in England itself, despite being an Irish beer, you know. So all those things make sense. If you look at Kenya,
Yeah.
it's formerly English as well. So I wouldn't know about, like, say, in Ethiopia, and I certainly don't know about like sort of the Islamic type of countries in the north. But yeah, it seems like a real market opportunity for sure. You know, I'll tell you, a buddy of mine is actually a brewer. He's an investor in Sullivan's. He's a guy I grew up with, and he sent me a text the other day with some bad language, and it was from the Food Network, and it was like 6 Irish beers you can focus on in the month of March. You know, I wrote them down just so I would be prepared for this, but I don't like looking at what I wrote down. I don't have to, but this will help frame some things for you guys. Obviously Guinness, right? Murphy's, even though the Food Network apparently doesn't realize you can't buy it anymore as soon as it's all gone. Obviously Smithwick's, that's sort of like the world's red ale until we got involved. Harp, which we've talked about, you know, certainly a big export beer, probably to Asia as well. O'Hara's, which is interesting, they're from Carlow, which is the county just above Kilkenny. And O'Hara's, which you may have seen on the shelves and so forth, isn't it? They just have a different business model. Their business model is to, they're kind of like, let's sell as much as beer as possible and just in an exporting kind of way and see where it lies. So you find them on a lot of cruise ships and hotels and weird countries and things like that. Because one of the Spanish breweries took a stake in them, we can now claim to be the largest independent brewery, the largest exporter of Irish beer from an independent brewery is Sullivan's now.
Wow.
Which is really something that we've just a hurdle we've crossed, and it's exciting for us. Yeah. And then along the lines of the cider game, even though it's not a beer, the Food Network named Magners. And a trivia question for you is Magners is known as Bulmers in Ireland. But you've seen those, like, I guess we would call those big cider. And my friend was complaining because, oh man, they didn't mention us. And so I guess that's homework for me, is to reach out to the Food Network and make them know who we are someday, you know? Yeah.
There's also Beamish is in Ireland.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it there a lot. My first experience with Beamish was when my husband and we went to Finland, and I really didn't have a lot of exposure to craft beer or foreign beer other than, you know, Corona and Harp, and that's it. And so we were at like the hotel bar in Finland, and we see this thing that says Beamish, and we had no idea, like, what is this? And it was like, at the time, this was 2008, and it was just such a new taste for me that I was like, wow, where can I get like something authentically European? Like, here I am in Miami, you know, drinking what I think is Irish, like a Killian's, right? And then I go to a different country, not even Ireland, to Finland, to Scandinavia, and I'm having a true Irish beer, and I'm like, why can't I have this experience in my own backyard, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really nice that we're finally there.
We are. I mean,
there.
Yeah. I'm almost positive Beamish is also from County Cork. I could be wrong. But here's what's very interesting. Our stout is not yet available in a can, but it's available on draft and doing extremely well, to be honest. So people never had a choice other than Guinness. And when, you know, I could pull up other slides like I've just shown you from, you know, on the beer style front, about American stouts, right? Which tend to be higher ABV. Many of them have adjuncts, which are like lactose or whatever else in there, as you know. But nobody besides Murphy's, Guinness, and Beamish were traditional Irish dry stouts. So along comes Sullivan's. Murphy's just gets blown out of the US. And Beamish, I don't know if Heineken bought them. Somebody big bought them and buried them. You can find it occasionally in Ireland. And so, yeah, interesting thing about Ian, just anecdotally, like a good few years ago when we were first launching in 2016, I'm with Master Brewer Ian in Buffalo, New York at a place called Resurgence Brewing. And he's climbing on the tanks with the Master Brewer. He automatically knew like this guy's a god, he knows what he's doing. And the guy who owns the place says to me, he goes, dude, let me get this straight. You guys are big beer and you're trying to like become craft people. And I said, that guy's been brewing. First of all, to be a master brewer, you have to have brewed for 25 years. So there's not many of them even in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I go, let's get this straight. I said, that guy has been brewing beers for 27, 28 years at the time, but they weren't his own recipe. This guy's gotten a chance. He's like a kid in a candy store. He's made his own recipes, which are the Sullivan's beers. And so it's kind of thrilling. So with Murphy's now being eliminated, and Beamish largely eliminated, O'Hara's and ourselves certainly are playing with stouts, and all the local craftspeople, craft breweries in Ireland are playing with stouts. But I mean, we're really making a business of stout, and trying to sell a lot of stout. And but interesting, Ian, because he obviously had the keys to the kingdom and knows both the recipe for Smithwick's and the recipe for Guinness, right? He set out to make something in between Guinness and Beamish. He loves Beamish. And so it's fun that you brought that up.
I love Beamish, and I haven't had a chance to have it in forever because it was in Syracuse about 2009,
Yeah.
2010, and then it just disappeared.
Yeah.
And I can't get it anywhere, not even Canada.
Yeah. So I'm not at all here to sell our beer. I'm here to just try to put it in the framework because you guys are learning about beer and care to learn about beer, maybe know a ton about beer. So, don't let me insult you in any of these ways. But I wanted to just focus not on us selling beer and more like these are from our sell sheets, which we might walk into a bar manager and show to and, sample them some beer. And then the distributor salespeople use these just to, like almost like fact sheets, right? But everything you've learned about so far, right, are the ingredients that go in here, right?
Yep.
The four sort of, mainstay base ingredients. We get really proud on the fact of stuff being local because our big goal is the insult of brewing leaving Kilkenny is to bring it back, right? And that's what we've done. Yeast, as you'll learn and have learned, there's basically ale yeast and lager yeast, and there's sort of a derivative of ale yeast, which is cask ale yeast. And there's a big movement, the pumps, like if you watch like some of these shows, these old British crime shows on Netflix and everywhere else, Amazon, you see them in the pubs like Midsummer, all those kind of series. You think of this with Boddington's, where they have to actually pump the beer, that's cask ale. And, Ian uses cask ale strains of yeast, which is important. But you'll learn the more you study beer, one of the things you can do is, get online and order different hop samples and chew on them and smell them, make tea from them that you don't drink, but like just, you could drink a little of it, just to give you a sense of how global, don't forget, hops only work at certain latitudes on the globe. Right. And then on those latitudes, there's obviously different characteristics native to the different soils and so forth, where they're happening, say the Pacific Northwest versus England itself, versus New Zealand even. So you can begin to study hops in that way, and it's fun to learn the difference. So, which ones you'll learn from Gloria and others, like not only what the characteristics of the different varietals of hops are, but also where and when they're put into the brewing process and the effect on the outcome of the beer, you know? So whether that's for a bittering effect or for an aroma effect, and oftentimes even on the bittering effect, whether that affects your palate on the front or on the back end of the tasting profile. So that's the only reason I wanted to bring these things up. It's interesting to know this about any beer, and to get your hands on this. Sorry, I don't want to go down to the stout. So for me, I've mentioned I'm not a hop person or an IPA person. And when Ian came up with our Irish Gold, we went 5.2 on ABV. It's got an absolute hop characteristic, but it reminds me of Pilsner Urquell, if you've ever had that Czech beer. For me, no, look, this is the same crap with wine, right? Like the way the glass of wine tastes to you doesn't mean it tastes the same to me. So let's not go there. I'm just trying to tell you what it does to me. But I will say, for me, I don't think anybody could argue that hops are on the front end of an IPA. And as you get into double A, it's amplified, a double IPA. These are hops on the finish for sure. And that's why I can tolerate and enjoy this beer quite a bit. And this is what it looks like here. I don't know if that shows up. So anyway, that's our Gold.
Can I interrupt 1 second and ask a question about the Gold?
Yeah.
Is this a specific Sullivan's invented style? I mean, I've never heard of an Irish Gold, so I'm not sure if it's something that's mostly in Ireland that Americans or Canadians have not yet heard of. So I'm just curious if this is a new style.
Yeah, so that's a good question. All right, it's a great question, because when I have to sort of, it's not asked as expertly as you just asked that normally. All right, but here's the truth, right? So what I would say about this is, I think we all know that India Pale Ales, i.e. IPAs, were mostly created to sustain ocean, voyage to India and the subcontinent and colonies and things like this, right? And Americans grabbed this in the 90s and just totally changed the whole profile, right? Golden ales, as our Canadian friends would know, and I see Martin's on the line, is probably my Canadian friend. Although he's Ottawa, so this doesn't count. But
he's Quebec.
Yeah, but like Molson Golden Ale is like a very, very famous golden ale, and certainly a lot of American breweries are making golden ales. Irish Gold is literally our brand name. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like we called our red, if you look at this, Maltings, because it's named after our original brewery building was called the Maltings in 1702. So that's just what I mean by a brand name. Irish Gold is a fun brand name. I mean, it doesn't have a leprechaun in it, but you get the joke. But it's a golden ale, which I would say is a descriptor more in color than in fact. And for me, I always describe this as an ale brewed in the tradition of Irish and British traditional ales. Does that help?
Yeah.
Which is pre-IPA and so forth.
Gotcha, thank you.
So that's the deal on there. So
it'd be more sort of like in the pale ale sort of territory.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm fine if we never call this a golden ale. I think we're calling it that less with loyalty to the beer style and more about accentuating the color. I mean, actually, I don't know if you can really see here, but I do have these with me. This beer, in terms of color, is just gorgeous, standing on a bar in a glass. It was a bit of a rough pour, but that's probably because I was walking down the street. I don't know if you can see that because this is Zoom, but it's a beautiful golden color, and that's the idea. Yeah.
I have to try that. I've seen that locally in Syracuse at Wegmans.
Yeah.
But now that I know it's at Kitty Hoynes in cans, I'm definitely going to try one.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to sell you Sullivan's beer. I'm just trying to go back to like what we were talking about on beer styles, right? So look, the dirty name out there when you're learning about beer styles is the international lager. And that's like a catch-all category for beer styles. because, you know, basically don't forget a lot of American lagers, like, and I mean, and then even worse, American light lagers. So Bud Light, right?
Mhm.
The experience was for all the German immigrants who wanted to brew beer, and this is like literally true. You have 4-row barley and 2-row barley, and the barley in America was not conducive to adding enough flavor to beer profiles. And so that's where they began to use corn and additives like that, adjuncts like that, right? And so, you know, it's just what has become, when I say the catch-all for the international lager game, is basically everything, like Heineken. It could be Tsingtao from China. Those are all just grouped into now these international lagers. And so we brew ales. We use ale yeast every time in these 3 beers, and those are the only 3 beers we have. So it's not like we're going to use a lager yeast. And by the way, the word lager means storage in German, and so you know, you're talking about a different process, sort of post brew as well, in terms of storing the beer to let it age. And I don't mean forever. I just mean for, you know, whatever, 2 months or something like that. So it gets tricky trying to fit into beer categories. And again, when I talked about beer styles on those cards, those again are North American centric parameters and definitions put around beer styles. So it's harder for Europeans to kind of fall into them, if that makes sense. Whereas American craft breweries are brewing to the style standards. Okay.
And that's what I have been teaching the class that just finished, is that, you know, like Belgian beers, for instance, and the British beers, they don't necessarily fall into a very neat style that like we as Americans or North Americans are accustomed to having everything in like a category and a box and a subcategory. You know,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a more of a looser interpretation when you're thinking about Belgian and British. So yeah, no, I definitely understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. This is fun because again, I made fun of myself in California with wines. Guess what? I avoided Napa and Sonoma for those 6 months. But you know what I learned like right away? Like I learned to figure out what my favorite grape was after I started embracing the process, right? And at the time, I loved peppery, deep, strong Zinfandels, right? You know, and not white Zinfandel, by the way. So that I learned, you know, and of course, as I've aged, not gracefully, I've learned, you know, that I like Cabernet Franc and I like Pinot Noir, you know, and then guess what? I guess it's pretty uncool to hate. It's pretty uncool to like Merlots at this point, but we can all say those things more readily, most of us anyway, about wine than we can about beer, because we don't think about it in the same way, you know, or you can understand dryness and tannins in a wine. And I think you're taking these courses to try to learn about the same effect, right? As you're drinking a beer. And I told you when I sit down, like I start with bitterness units because I know I don't like overly hopped beers. And then I want to know what my game plan is on ABV for this, for the program. So I think these things are helpful to look at. And there are different apps where you can get this kind of thing to understand, you know, appearance, aroma, taste, food pairings, etc.
Definitely. And we touched upon some of those things in the beer basics, but the advanced course, and I'm not trying to advertise myself either right now, but we will be getting into, you know, the SRMs and really getting into like the IBU and kind of like evaluating something without even tasting it, you know, and looking at it and saying, okay, is this something that I would want to have, knowing that it's 85 IBU, you know, or you know, not necessarily the SRMs, because color can be very what's the word, tricky, you know. It can definitely disguise itself, but I think that you know, learning about beer before you even taste it as well, or like you said, going to a bar and just seeing the facts of where it's from and, you know, what the IBU or the ABV is. I think that's something that I think informed consumers want to know. I think it's a really good thing that those things are available. Kind of like in New York City, right? Remember when a few years ago it was mandatory that all the restaurants had to put their caloric contents, and then and that was like a big thing. I remember, and I went there one time visiting Dante, and I went to Five Guys in Manhattan, and I was like, really? There's that many calories in the cheeseburger that I eat? I'm like, wow, now I really know like what I'm ingesting, what I'm tasting. Yeah, that's one thing, but what is actually in it is another. So I think something like that for beer is, just knowledge is power,
Absolutely. Somebody on the call wanted to talk a little bit about food pairings.
Yeah, that was Adina.
Okay, Adina, what's interesting here? First of all, no matter what I could teach you or Gloria could teach you about food pairings, you still need to have a couple of books on your shelves on this topic. And I have them all. I mean, there's 3 of them. And that's some of the stuff I like to read the most. I mean, I did go to cooking school, for fun on the side at one point in my life. And even though I don't really cook anymore, but I love cooking and I love eating. And one of the things, this is really interesting, that if you're already down this path, Adina, but let me just say it for everybody else's sake, there's 2 things you can do. You can either be complementary to what you're pairing, or you can be antithetical to what you're pairing, right? And so I would say, I'll give you an example of that. If you're having really, really, I believe most of us would agree, the Chinese provincial food, the Szechuan Chinese food is known for its being the most spicy, right? And I mean, almost universally, you'd want to cut that with a very, very bitter IPA to cut the spice, right? So that's an example of kind of antithetical. But when you think of complementary, and I think of Irish beer specifically, whether it's Smithwick's, whether it's Sullivan's Red, Maltings Red, whether it's Guinness or Sullivan's Black Marble Stout, I like to think about the complementary quite a bit. Think about pairing a stout with a chocolate cake at dessert or a tiramisu, right, on the complementary side. But there's something even more kind of chemically important here that makes specifically, like I mentioned that we have a fair amount of hoppiness in our gold, right? So, that can get into that description of what I just said about spicy food and the countering blow, right? That's what I would have there. But I love the complementary aspect of either our red or our stout for one chemical fact. And that is when a brewer actually roasts malt. So don't forget, malt is roasted barley. And you can go online and you can buy little stacks of the varying types of malt and see the different colors that they are. And then your brain can understand why a beer is a certain color, right? So these things are, but they're to be learned. But what's really interesting, the chemical process of literally roasting malt is the same chemical process that happens when you're roasting a duck breast in a pan, or when you're roasting a roast beef in the oven, and it is called a Maillard process, Maillard process. It's the same literal chemical process. So this is where you get into how, by the way, we've got a lot more meat on the bone, not just at 5% versus 3.8% on Sullivan's versus Smithwick's, but you have a lot more malt complexity. So if you have something that's all about the roast flavor, our red is incredible. And you can double down on that if you want to do that with a stout, is how to think about that. And that's where beer color comes into play. But it also comes into play for food pairing, just on that chemical level. I think that's really, really interesting. I took the Cicerone exam and they had to teach me what it was in the exam, and I still don't remember what it is, and I certainly don't care. But a big dish in France and Belgium is cassoulet. And I forget what meat's in there, and there's beans and all this crap in there or whatever. So, well, for me, and one of my favorite beers on the earth is a Belgian Saison. So Saison DuPont, right? Always buy one if you want to explore beer and get freaked out on flavor profiles. And I knew without knowing anything about that dish that Saison was the right beer for it. And so as you develop that, the one thing I'll say is I watched all the pretentious people in California, you know, put their finger up and hold the stem only on a wine glass and all that crap, is that you can actually teach yourself flavor profiles of beer, and you can do it by working at it. Because I've done it and I've achieved it. I haven't achieved much in life, but I've achieved that. It's fun, you know, like you can really understand what's going on and then think about what you're about to put in a pot or a pan and then think about that. And the guy who runs Brooklyn Brewery just has an unbelievable book. And there's a couple others I could send along to you that I have. Geez, I mean, it would, you know, in one of the books, I'm not sure which one it was, it said, you know, a sommelier will tell you how impossible it is to pair wine with food. But I think the quote was something like, you know, and maybe they have 500 angles to that. But in beer, you've got like 3,500 or 4,500 angles to do that. And you could do it over every course of the meal as well. So
actually, it's funny that you bring that up. I know we were talking about the food stuff. We talked about that last night, was our very last class. It was food and beer pairing. And so I've got the books right here. This is from the Brooklyn Brewery brewmaster Garrett Oliver. This is actually my very first beer book that I received as a gift right when it came out. So this is like, it's something to definitely have in your library, definitely, and this one as well.
Yeah, I have that one too. Yeah. Yeah.
Tasting Beer by Randy Mosher. This really helped me in general with the Cicerone certified beer server exam, but the food and the beer pairing is where I got a lot of my material for last night's class. This is just, it's just such a, these two are just like, you got to have them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, you know, like going back to color, because this shouldn't be lost on anybody. This is an important thing when you're learning about beer, you know, disassociate yourself from dark meaning high ABV. It's like the complete mistake in the whole game, you know. It doesn't necessarily need to be the case, and it has nothing to do with it, by the way. And I think it's really interesting because like in Belgian strong ales versus Belgian triples, the lighter ABV of those two beer styles is actually the darker of the two, you know? So, you know, a lot of times out of darker beers, you can evoke sweetness, right? Which you get from like, nobody really realizes that Negro Modelo is actually, you know, this Mexican beer, which I love.
I do too.
Completely, it's a Marzen. It's completely German influenced brewing that's going into that beer. It has nothing to do with Mexico. It has to do with Mexican settlers in Mexico who began brewing beer. So it's funny, you know, like you got to pull your brain out of it for a minute and just look at a glass and like own it, you know, try to figure it out.
I think that's the great thing about beer. I mean, like you've got all this culture, you've got cultures, you know, meeting one another when it comes to, you know, settlers, immigrants, and just, you know, like you said, Negro Modelo, you know, you think Mexican, but it's really of another culture that Mexicans have adopted, you know, as, I don't want to say as their own, but like, that's just, when you go to Mexico, that's the kind of style you're going to get. And not just that brand of beer. You're going to get, you know, the Marzen and the Vienna lagers there more than you're going to get them in Austria, you know? Yeah. So I think that's the really neat thing about, you know, when we talk about beer is just even from the cultural context, there's just so much going on. And you know, we're looking at the beers of Ireland, but you know, they're like, we could just have a whole course on this. You know what I mean? Like this is, there's a lot of stuff there. And maybe that's why I love beer so much, is because it's educational, it's fascinating, and you can drink your own history, right? You can drink some history there.
Oh yeah. By the way, I had to come back to one thing for Adina, right? Which is this idea of what's going on for cities. So I think you wanted to speak to that. And I'll tell you, if you want to lead into it a little bit more, and then I can jump on that, because I have something interesting to tell you there.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so my last name is Brewington. So, I mean, that's just to start, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, my dad's family comes from a culture of Blacks and Indians in Rockingham, North Carolina. And so, you know, they did their own homebrew back in the day. And so, you know, you would go down there to visit, not me personally, but that was something that was always readily available. And my dad and my uncles were always beer drinkers, but the things that I remember them drinking were like Colt 45. And I think that he drinks like Milwaukee's Best, like, you know, like those things. So, you know, right. So like as a kid, when you say like, oh, can I have a sip? You know, they give you a sip of it and it's like, ew, what is this? Like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
So you kind of just are kind of turned off by it, but that's what was available in our community. So our beer distributors, yes, as a kid, Dante, beer distributors, and kind of like those stop and go corner stores where you could like run in and grab something quick. It was like mass produced beer or malt liquor or spritzers and things like that. So you really didn't have access. And so then as you grow older and you start to maybe go out to a club or something, in Philly at least, it was you were going to get a Corona or a Yingling. And for me, I was more drawn to the Yingling because it had a better flavor profile, right? And so that's kind of how I transitioned and maybe to that style of beer. And then once I moved to a more affluent neighborhood in Philly, that's where craft beer entered my life. Just interacting with like, you know, it's basically like my neighborhood cheers. So I would hang out. I was into bourbon, have a little drink here and there. But then I said, you know what? I really want to taste some of the stouts that you have. And so they had a lot of the Southern Tier stouts that were on, which are more kind of dessert forward. So some of them were like, the, you know, the creme brulee and things like that. So I started that way. And to me, they were delicious, but also the ABV was high. So like you're saying, you can't talk about dark and just high ABV, but that was my initial thought process. But of course I would compare it to the Guinness, which was lighter. In my opinion, I liked it, but I like the boozier ones better. So as I started to get into the stouts, then I transitioned to the Belgian triples and quads and barley wines because they were still kind of that higher ABV, but that flavor profile was so different and it was lighter and sweeter, and I really enjoyed that. Then I transitioned into IPAs. So I got into, you know, double IPAs, triple IPAs, and then, you know, once hazy IPAs kind of came out, I really liked that because to me of the depth of flavor, I always say it's like the pot liquor at the bottom of collard greens. Like you're going to get everything in there. They're unfiltered. That's the delicious like stuff that you want. But for my family in particular, everybody's like, we don't like beer. And it's because of what they've been exposed to. So I said, you know, I want to do a beer and food pairing at home. And I think I did like a roasted leg of lamb. And then I paired that with like a Belgian strong ale. And I did roasted root vegetables and I had a pairing for that. And then I actually did homemade French onion soup, but I paired it with like a peanut butter porter. And people were like, this is tremendous. And then I went on to do a beer and dessert pairing where we did 5 beers and 5 desserts. And everybody who attended at least left with one thing that they enjoyed. And to me, that was something of an accomplishment because then I had friends and family members who now were going out to bars and sending me pictures of beers that they were trying. Because like you said, when you're coming from it from that perspective, you're talking about 3,500 different options, right? Of things that you can try and you can pair with food. And I think they're starting to explore that, but we have to kind of get to the crux of it and increase the exposure for that community in particular, if that makes sense.
It does. The like it's really interesting. I had some buddies over less than 2 months ago. I bought a bunch of Belgian beers, right? And they had never tried the framboise and all these things, these lamb things, you know. But I mean, my God, if those don't sort of completely, they're almost like wines for God's sake. So they're perfect with like an appetizer, or they're perfect with a dessert. And, you know, and then again, going back to color, it's just like if you have a Belgian strong ale, they're gold in color and will make you blind, right? Their alcohol content, you know, so we just all have to get used to that and what it all means along the way. But those books are indispensable that you saw. I wanted to tell you, we put out a press release last June, and as a result of it, the mayor's office in Chicago reached out to me and said, you know, I mean, they have like a, you know, a business development corp, right? And it's like a JV with the Chamber of Commerce, whatever. So actually, I had COVID early in the process, so I didn't care about traveling. So I flew out there in July and met with them. They told me it was their first meeting since February, but they had quite a bit of focus on brewery development in Chicago in inner city places. So like, if that's like an axe for you to grind that you want to work on or something, I could connect you to those people because they have a plan and a story around it that they're actually implementing. To your very point. So, by the way, related to Philly, our beers were storming late January until COVID started. So we're about to relaunch there in April. So we actually made a big hit quite quickly, and then it ended quite quickly. I had a call with our distributor there last Monday, and they're gung ho, but they are handicapping the date is around April 15th because Philadelphia has been more shut down than New York City. And the last thing I'll tell you, because you brought up a couple of points, is that I'm engaged in discussions with the distributor in Delaware and Maryland. So you never know. You never know. But I don't know if we talk. I don't think you can just talk about Irish beer, even though it's the season. So I tried to, but I wanted to talk about how our Irish beers and other competing Irish beers sort of contribute to the world of, you know, beer drinking, beer aesthetics, food pairings, and all that. So I hope it was helpful. I could stay on all night, but I don't want to do that. Probably not what you want to do either. But tell me.
Yeah, no, I really think that Irish beer has such an influence. I can't speak to my Canadian friend who unfortunately had to leave a little early, but in the States, just from growing up in my experience, like it's like a very present beer. And maybe that's because I'm from upstate New York. That's, you know, Syracuse is, I just read yesterday, is the 9th most Irish city in the States. So, you know, like I grew up with that, but I see it everywhere I go, even when I lived in Florida. You know, like you definitely see, you may not have the range of Irish beers that you can get in the Northeast, but it's still very prevalent. So I think, you know, there's something to be said about Irish beers. And, you know, I did this happy hour as a theme because it is, you know, St. Patrick's Day next week, but also because I think it's just an important topic that, you know, when we talk about beer and craft beer, that it's something that, you know, I think we should like know more about and enjoy more.
I appreciate it. You know this better as well as I do anyway. You know, we are positioning ourselves as a premium craft import. You know, we have 15 people who work at our company. We're never going to be 50, you know, and we're just making 3 beers and trying to do it very, very well. The different rub is that we're actually very, very focused on exporting from Ireland and making our name known and stuff like that. So I'm sure, because some of you are asking questions, but through Gloria, you can ask me anything you want. Gloria is free to dish out my email or my cell phone number. And then if you ever want to know where the beer is or anything like that, feel free to hit me up. And we can try to help engage. And, you know, maybe depending on where you live, make sure, I would certainly want to make sure I invite you to any events if you're close by that we do, right?
Most definitely. I mean, the great thing, Mike, is that, you know, you and I keep in touch, and, you know, I'm in upstate New York and you're in both upstate and in New York. So like, if there's ever anything that's in the area or in the Northeast, you know, I don't know about Florida. I know, Lauren, you're in Orlando. You know, that might be a little while more, but I think, you know, like I was saying to Adina, like, if you want to try and sample, like, I think the great thing about like beer, like so many people send beers from everywhere. So like, even though a certain brand might not be available, you know, connections and networking, you know, you can try anything, right?
Just do like an exchange. Yeah.
Definitely.
Lauren,
Definitely.
Cool.
don't tell anybody because you're not allowed to tell anybody. But I was in Florida last week meeting with distributors. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
My
So,
lips are sealed.
I'm curious as to who you talk to, but I'm sure you can't.
well, it's too late
Divulge.
for that. I mean, we're in 9 states now, and so it's a
Can
lot.
you tell me the states?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, let me make sure I don't misspeak because sometimes I think it's 10. So let's go in order of how we arrived and everything. So New York, then Ohio, then Pennsylvania, then Georgia. We are in California. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can't believe we're in
New
Tennessee.
Jersey?
What's that?
New
Yeah.
Jersey?
New Jersey. So what's that? 1, 2, 3. That's like 7. I can't believe like I don't have this on the tip of my tongue because I
That's okay. I put you on the spot.
bash my face against the wall every day thinking about this. Shit, which one am I missing? Oh, Michigan. We're in Detroit and Ann Arbor and all the 8 southern counties there. Yeah, so now I'm at 8, and my 9th is actually just very much pending, and that's North Carolina. We're contracted to go statewide in North Carolina, and that's been a very restricted state. So it's just like we all love each other, but when's the right time? And
Right.
I respect them for that because they want to do it right. So
Of course, of course. Well, just firsthand experience, going to Ireland and having the Irish experience for a few days, and just being a general aficionado of Irish beers. This has been just like a wonderful time to just hear what's going on in Ireland, what the beers are all about, and and more to come, right?
I really appreciate the chance to talk to you guys. I hope it didn't bore you with tears or anything.
That was great.
Yeah.
If I could throw in some 2 cents on my Florida experience, you don't have to tell me who you were talking to, but I don't recommend Ray's distributing
Yeah,
officially.
we're safe.
So just giving you a heads up because I had really bad experience with them. So
No, it's hey, we all love beer. Some of us are already in,
I want you
some
guys
of
to
us
be
are
able to
already in the business. So if we can help each other out, why not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Michael, first and foremost, for spending time with us here. This has been great, and I am so happy that I was able to get this and that I can get this locally. And if you can't get it locally, let me know because I want you to experience
I
it.
probably can. So I'm interested in trying it out.
There you go. I know I'm plugging it because I can. And I'm going to keep plugging it because this is a great, not only is it a great beer, it's a great company backed and created and founded by people who are just amazing individuals. And I will always be grateful for that.
Wow, that's
So always, always, always. So with that, have a wonderful evening. I am going to put this link once it becomes available. I'll put it on the YouTube channel for anybody else, and we can share that. And yeah, what do you say in Irish? Is it a sláinte, right?
Sláinte.
I finished though, so
Oh,
bad
look
luck.
at yourself now.
All right, there's a little bit left. Sláinte. All right, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Around.